Hello, Nader. Welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Indeed, it's a big pleasure, and I'm very excited about this conversation. Many people tend to think that the problem is with the spacecraft taking the pictures. The problem in the Earth observation market has to deal more with the spacecraft taking pictures and getting the pictures down to Earth. But in reality, the problem is not that, but making sense of all the data that's received. No, and I believe that's what LYRASense is trying to solve. So before we jump into your story, which I have to say it's amazing, can you briefly explain what LyraSense is and what problem you solve?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very fair point that you just shared. And as a matter of fact, we're generating more data from space than ever before, and that number is probably going to keep on increasing exponentially. But the biggest bottleneck is translating that data into value-adding applications from the end user perspective. We see a big bottleneck there, and the idea of LyraSense is to lower these barriers to entry. Right now, the entire industry relies on a relatively a small number of experts that are able to or have the capabilities to tap into this wealth of information and translate that into whether insights or something that drives or brings value to their end customers. What we're trying to do is empower a much wider audience to have access to it and tap into that wealth of information. So, simply put, it's a software platform that allows someone that doesn't necessarily have a PhD in remote sensing to build a useful application that brings them or their company value.
Okay, that's a great summary. Now I think we can now talk about you briefly. You're Nader Labib, aerospace and astrophysicist, and I think you can take it first. Explain how you came to be both, and then how you came to build LyraSense because
Wow, I mean it's a that's a long story. I think the whole fascination about space started at childhood for sure. Kind of like to understand that a bit of context. I grew up in a very little village outside of fishing town by the coast of the Red Sea, so it's somewhere pretty relatively remote. But one of the
indeed.
perks there is having clear skies. And as a child, I just fell in love with watching the stars. And I think one of the kind of the moments that kind of stayed with me for a while is that there was a day where my father took me out to watch Comet Hale-Bopp. I don't know if you're old enough to recall that, but I remember the it was such a fascinating sight, and I recall him saying that, hey, this is something that you only get to see once in a lifetime. Probably the next time someone would see this visible would be like in 2,000 years or so. And it kind of like struck me how vast space is. And I think even though the country where I grew up, we didn't have a space program, but the alternative was to kind of like read books and watch series. Like I don't know if you know the Cosmos and Carl
Yeah,
Sagan kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
but even though to be honest, I didn't get 90% of it at the time, but it was very inspiring. Like I knew I wanted to get into that space somehow. And then it was clear at university it's going to be engineering for me. And then I was very lucky to land a scholarship to one of the top space masters program, and that in Europe, and that was kind of like the gateway into this whole topic of space. Um,
Okay, and after getting into the aerospace academia, into university, the masters and so on, how did you? Well, what steps did you took that then have led you to reach this point to found Lyrasense?
I think I think wanting to start something has always been there. It was a question of what and the right team and the right moment in time to kind of get started working on it. Lyra Sense, I think it was never a straight line kind of story. It was so many things happening in my personal life and experiences, also with my co-founder, that kind of built up to this over time. From I don't know, like situations where once in 1996 I was stuck in like a flash flood coming back from school on a bus, and it was a very devastating experience. But then fast forward to when I was working on my master's, and then the whole launch of the Sentinels and realizing that hey, we're putting satellites in orbit and the data has the potential to actually like at least save lives. But then the tooling around it is very difficult, and I think when I met my co-founder, so kind of like fast forward 10 more years, um, he's like he's a genius when it comes to software development, but not a space guy whatsoever. And
Mhm.
to us, that was like a brilliant kind of perspective, because you get to see someone looking at the tooling we use to tackle geospatial problems or to use satellite data. And I recall him saying, "Wow, this is like traveling back in time. Like, there's so much that has evolved in the software world that is not yet there in the space sector." And I think that was kind of the trigger point to start LYRASENSE. Like right now, I'm fascinated to see him build solutions using LyraSense without having a PhD in remote sensing, for example. So I think it's this kind of like making it more accessible to a much wider audience. That was kind of like that spark that we both had. He comes from Greece. There's a lot of wildfires there,
Yes.
a lot of things that you could definitely tackle, and with satellite data. And then the question was, what if we give more people access to it? For years, satellite data and imagery have been kind of like the cornerstone of scientific discovery, breakthrough. Geospatial data in general is like very very critical for our global economy. But then it's always like I mentioned earlier, it's always been kind of locked up behind siloed legacy systems, heavily reliant on that PhD in remote sensing or the super technical data engineer to kind of unlock that value. And our challenge, or the challenge we decided to take on, is like, what if we make it possible for students and organizations, as in businesses alike, to have the same capabilities and to be able to unlock such value at a planetary scale. And that's kind of the thing that united us and made us decide to go after building Lyrasense.
That's amazing because I think it's a great point that you made that your co-founder isn't an aerospace sort of expert or doesn't come from the space industry, because yeah, he comes with a fresh set of eyes and fresh set of ideas to the industry, and sees how, yeah, conservative it is in with regards to technology and the technology it uses. And it's true that it's, yeah, we tend to see, well, I tend to hear, I've heard this opinion, it's like 10 to 15 years behind
Yeah.
the current
I mean,
technology.
from the software perspective, yeah, like everyone
Of
gets
course, no, no, of
excited.
course, of course, of course.
Everyone gets excited to put a rocket, to launch a rocket, or to put a satellite in orbit, but then data tends to be an afterthought in a lot of cases. And yeah, that's the thing we're trying to change. Yeah.
Indeed, and that's also a question I had for you, because when someone, or when I'm an aerospace engineer as well, but when I think about, oh, when I tend to think about space companies and space applications, it's very, well, it's not intuitive to think of geospatial data analytics platforms as space companies or as space products, because yeah, we tend to think about the hardware and, let's say, the upstream side of the industry, which is getting things to space. And once you've reached space, you've succeeded in your venture. But no, the reality is that doesn't matter what you do in space. The important thing is what you do with the data that you receive from that asset that is in space.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, this is where we see a bottleneck. At the end, LyraSense wants to be that interface between everything you put on orbit, and everything we do and use in our daily lives. That's kind of like the where you drive most value.
Okay, now I have two more questions. One is, was there like a particular point in time where you saw that, yes, this is a specific problem I want to solve, this bottleneck about for data processing, or was it more of like slowly discovering and pivoting one way and another until you came to the right idea?
I think the honest answer, it wasn't very straightforward from day one. My co-founder and I wanted to build something in that space in general. The reason being us experiencing firsthand the challenge as well. Like, before even Lyra Sense, we decided to kind of work together on a little project where we needed to ingest quite a lot of data. A lot of it was geospatial data and satellite imagery, etc. And we ran into that problem that, hey, it's not so easy. There is no one place to go to and then just focus on delivering impact and what you actually want to build, without worrying about getting the data, setting up all the infrastructure behind it, and then having something that helps you accelerate that. So it was kind of like a first experience with the issue. And then what we did next, I think, became our biggest advantage. we didn't just go out there and start building. We took our time interviewing users. So I think we spent a few good months doing interviews, and it's kind of like a software first approach. So it's not new if for someone like in the Bay Area building a crazy piece of software, but it's not very common in the space sector. It's normally like a data provider building a solution that's it, and you kind of like either use it or not. What we decided to do is really go out there and try to understand the pain points, shadow some of the experts, see how they work, see the problems they have with their existing tooling, etc. And we did that with literally hundreds. So from ones working on very small projects in research institutes to startups building biodiversity solutions to senior data engineers at the likes of Planet and ISI. And we kind of like tried to understand how we can build something that caters for the users. And I think one of the key things we agreed upon early on, my co-founder and I, is that we're going to build for and around our users. It's the idea is not to kind of also fix what's broken. It's you mentioned it earlier. It's starting with that kind of clear and fresh like a clean slate or fresh perspective, and building something that empowers our users and solves their problems. And I think that was kind of the what made LYRASense special. So it evolved over time. There was like I wouldn't say there were like major pivots from one thing to another, but it was a lot of iterations, and we didn't delay showing it to users. Like we had super fast iterations. We started with sketching things on paper to like wireframes to things that were not even working, and just like put it there as like, hey, what do you think? What should be there? How can we improve that to build it into something that you would use? And it was this kind of like these kind of quick iterations that eventually led up to what we have today, and it probably still evolve. Yeah.
100%, of course, nothing is static in the market. But you made a very good point, because like we tend to hear now, like I think it's everywhere, no, like yes, the customer first and build with the customer in mind, and it's kind of like a mantra everywhere you go. But not many people actually live that idea and put it into practice, right? Because many people, yeah, with the customer in mind, but the customer is in their head, never talk to the customer and rather sit down and build it first, or try to build an MVP first to then show to the customer. It's yeah, the way to go is first to speak with the customers, hundreds, as you said. That's impressive, and understand what their problems are and their needs are, to then try to build something that works for them. I have to say, that I imagine wasn't easy, right? Because the easy thing is to sort of hide and try to build things to see that you're progressing, because by building things you sort of feel like you're progressing, but by speaking, it might
Yeah.
be a struggle, no? Right, internally, to
Yeah,
say.
yeah. It's also a bit of a challenge when you have a very strong conviction to something and then you get, oh, no, that's not how I want it. It's like when you realize that what you have in your head is like maybe more like an assumption that you need to quickly validate, then that's it. That's what I'm building. That's what I have to go to market with. And I think it took us, quite honestly, also some time to adjust to that because we had a lot of assumptions of what the user would need, and a lot of these things are still with us, but obviously a lot of them we just dropped out. Also, in kind of like cleaning up the features that we want to have in our product at launch, etc. Like a lot of things that we love in kind of like thinking about it as a piece of tech that we want to build, but not everything is actually solving a problem for our customer. And I think it's this challenging your own thinking and assumptions is normally a bit challenging and tough at the beginning, but you get used to it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's that or dying, right? So you better get used to it. But okay, now on my previous question, I had it also. You've I don't know if you've joined the train or the wave, but you also mentioned very heavily. You rely very heavily on artificial intelligence. Can you talk a bit about that, and also like, but perhaps I can ask this later. But well, yeah, I'll ask this question after you finished, so that I don't break the conversation.
No, I mean, to us, it was pretty evident from our discussions with users that we're gonna have to rely on everything that is evolving in the whole AI world. It's we live in crazy times. Like everything that is happening, like the cost or barriers to innovation are dropping. You can there's like no more excuses. In the past, "Oh, I'm not a software developer, I cannot build anything." Now you possibly can put something together. um, and we kind of saw that early on. Like, we had all these questions of how do we leverage everything that is evolving in maybe other sectors or other industries or in the software world, and bring that into LyraSense and into what we're building, not as tech for the just for the love of tech, but technology as an enabler. So, like, what are the bits that we can kind of pull from there that we could empower our users? And I think it gave us quite an edge, maybe a 9 month head start to a lot of our competition, even big companies that we're seeing now moving into that direction in our kind of area. Um, and it was all because we kind of like come from that world, but we spoke with the customers and we were trying to kind of associate different things from different industries, and not just be focused on just space, purely space sector. But kind of generally speaking, taking a step back, I think, besides everything that is evolving so fast and because of AI, I think it's generally changing so many things. Like, also the ability for like even operators of satellite constellations, and the ability to run things on orbit, or there's just so massive use cases and applications that you can now tap into because of this, which
But
it's very
but
exciting times.
of course, 100%. But at the same time, there's a lot of hype and a lot of like fake clouds, no, so to say, like fake ideas and fake applications of AI in the space industry, right? So how do perhaps you have a how can you tell between real applications and like value adding applications and just noise, so to say?
I think it comes back to that point of building for and around your users. Like, at the end of the day, if you're trying to fix a specific problem, and there is one piece of technology that is out there that you can just kind of pull and rely on and build with and integrate with in whatever you're building to actually bring someone value, it's very different than just being excited to build like the most advanced, I don't know, model for something. Because like our approach at least is really genuinely user focused. There's so many crazy cool things that we would love to implement. I mean, we have a huge list, and we keep like all these tickets of everything we would love to have, everything we'd love to build. But then I think it's balancing that versus what do we actually need to build that actually brings value to someone, and not just be like just going with like with all the cool buzzwords that we just want to stick there just to seem cool. Um, at the end, if you have a very clear idea of what your user wants and how you can empower them with technology, it kind of helps you narrow down what your focus is, and enables you to clearly see that's a piece of technology that I'm going to integrate today. That's possibly in the near future, or not at all.
That explains it very well. And now, like moving as you were saying, adding value to the user, could you, for the people perhaps like me who are more focused on hardware and the upstream side of the industry, like who would be your ideal user, and how does the platform work in terms of what does the user get, or how does the user use the platform, and what does he get out of it? If you can sort of give an overview of the platform, and then we can
Yeah.
go into specifics if needed. But
Yeah, I could definitely start with the latter. That's the easiest. So what we realize is often the case is that our user knows the problem they want to solve or the job to be done. For example, I want to monitor a specific port to know what has changed, or I want to check how that city has evolved in terms of like planning or construction over the past couple of years. It's normally just a simple kind of question or problem that they have at hand. And on LyraSense today, you're able to go from that very simple thing, nothing technical at all, to a fully deployable application. So it's not just querying a data set or talking with some data that is already kind of computed in the background, but it's actually helping the user in the background figure out which data they need for that application, all the kind of like the technical stuff around it, and then enabling them or empowering them to build an analysis on top of that. And what they could get out depends on the use case. From from a report to a dashboard to even kind of exporting some imagery if they wish. That's kind of what it does in terms of the ideal users. So it's quite varied, and that's why we have this kind of also a tiered subscription model. So we have users that are almost like freelancers that are building solutions for their customers. But I think what excites us most are the bigger enterprise customers, and the users there tend to be more of the data scientists. So they're not necessarily geospatial experts whatsoever. Often is the case, at least that's what we're seeing, as awareness improves within non-space industries. We're going to kind of like even make LYRASENSE easier so that even the business side can easily use it. But for the time being, most of our users tend to be generalist data scientists, people that are not so scared of seeing a bit of code, but not necessarily geospatial experts. And they're now able to build these solutions. Obviously, sometimes for very specific solutions, a domain expert is obviously
Mhm.
very helpful. But you don't have to just rely on these overworked 2, 3 individuals in your team that are trying to build solutions for everyone within a large scale organization. Now these people feel very empowered.
Of course, and it makes sense because if you want to, if your use case is monitoring a specific area of land or port or city, probably like you aren't probably a space engineer if you want to do that, so to say. So you're probably yeah, a data scientist or like software engineer who doesn't necessarily need to be very knowledgeable on the space industry itself, but just needs to get some data and analyze it, as you said.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then again, the biggest value comes when you combine such data with what the non-space sector would refer to as real data, so like tabular data or spreadsheets or financial models, etc. That's when you start seeing the biggest kind of value from satellite imagery and geospatial data in general. Um, so that giving users a tool that enables them to do that is, to us, that feels very kind of like, that's why we have very strong conviction for it.
Okay, but now we would, we have talked about the users of the platform, but LyraSense as a platform needs to get some data or to accumulate some data. How does that work? And how do you get that data from the people who actually, on the companies who actually
Yeah,
produce that data?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty straightforward, and it's generally partnerships with both marketplace kind of data platforms, as well as directly with providers, as well as companies that are maintaining specific data sets. So not just imagery, but like pre-processed data sets for specific use cases.
Okay, and two questions have come up. Do you do any pre-processing of the data that you get to prepare it for your users?
I mean, we're getting a bit more
Oh,
technical now,
yeah.
but for some things, yes, but not to the degree that we're fully developing a solution for our customers end to end. What we focus on is kind of this intelligence layer that understands what the user needs to build, and then figures out where to get the data. Kind of this whole contextual part of what the data is, how you could use it for, and how you can build something with it. I think that's where our biggest IP is. And then everything else is around like optimizing how this kind of like is orchestrated in the background.
So in a way, you're building, let's see, the closest thing to lovable, but for the geospatial industry.
Yeah, in many ways it's similar, with the simple addition of getting the access to the data. Like I think if you go on Lovable or any other agentic AI solution out there, also like Manos or so on, it's very difficult. I mean, you're in the industry, figuring out where to get that data, which provider has the
It's
right data
complicated.
sets, and then getting it somewhere, setting it up, how to work with it, etc. So I think, yeah, more or less it's similar with a bit of additions to it, of course.
That's very good. And okay, also, so for the people who might not understand very well how the geospatial market works, can you give a brief overview? Now, after having explained how your platform operates, sort of if you can give a brief overview of how the sort of yeah the market works. You've got some players who produce the information, and that information is sold to governments, companies, and private individuals, perhaps, who want to might use that information for something. Anything else that people need to know about the market?
I think that the upstream side is pretty straightforward. Downstream could be a bit complex, but you kind of gave a very high level overview. So normally it's you have the data providers, and then right now the typical flow of information is like you have kind of like an analytics layer or an insights layer, and then I don't know some sort of an end user application built on top of that. What we're trying to fundamentally challenge is kind of like start from the other way around, like the user and then kind of work backwards to data. So we try to enable them to get to their application right away without going through this whole very lengthy sales cycles of I mean, if you try to buy purchase data today, that's a whole challenge on its own, for example, where you need to know already the use case and what resolution you need and how many, like what's the revisit rate and what kind of data. You have to be able to explain that to a tech salesperson so that they can come back to you with an offer. And for a lot of organizations that are just getting started, there's that huge barrier. Like, first of all, they don't often know all of that stuff. And then they're expected to invest heavily in the whole kind of like infrastructure, the data pipelines, everything to do around that, and then the expertise they need in house, and the software and the tooling they would need to be able to build something. And then the result is often like they just opt out because hey, like it's such a big investment, a very lengthy process until we start seeing value, and a lot of times they just don't know if it's justifiable or not. And what we're trying to tear down is this exact barrier. Like, how can we enable them to quickly prototype or quickly get from a very simple prototype to a scalable solution without worrying about everything before that. And that means that we cannot also rebuild or reinvent the wheel everywhere, but rely on strategic partnerships with data providers, with exceptional companies that have developed very state of the art models for specific use cases. And we just focus on that kind of intelligence layer and the whole toolboxing around.
Okay, with the goal of enabling people to exploit all that data that without you, many people don't see the value of exploiting because of the complications of getting accessing the data and then processing it and so on.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a very very noble goal because there's a lot. I mean, we're seeing it now. Now I'm from Spain as well, so over the summer periods, the coast of the Mediterranean or all Mediterranean countries have many fires. There's a lot of natural disasters. We had one in November in Spain, a very very heavy natural disaster, and yeah, it's very hard. And with the amount of data that we can get from space, it could be not perhaps not prevented, but understood better or prevented for the future. I don't know. There's a lot of applications that can be derived from or knowledge that can be derived from analyzing Earth observation data.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the number of applications is easily exceeds what is available out there. Like even when we discuss that with providers of data, they also know that the potential of different applications that their data could be useful to is far greater than what they can build business cases over. And I think that's kind of like what also excites them about working with us is that we enable the end customer to kind of answer their own questions or build their own solutions based on what they actually need, and we just help them figure out what data makes sense for that. Um,
Now, moving a bit about, like from the product, which I might come back in a minute if because I have more questions in the background, but you're taking a very novel approach towards building an intelligence platform for spatial for Earth observation data. How is that perceived in the industry? Because as you said at the beginning, it's we tend to be from the software side rather conservative, also in the hardware side in terms of innovation at times, but and often too much innovation might be like yeah overwhelming for the government entities, other companies, and so on.
yeah, I mean it's a very fair point. It was also some of the challenges we had early on. There's that kind of like almost like um, a legacy way of thinking, and then when you want to challenge that, it's like, yeah, but would it work? Why would it
Exactly.
work? That's not how we're used to. You just have to just follow the process. And I think just kind of like the challenge we had at the beginning is how do we break out of that? Um, what we would refer to as so-called experts. I mean, a lot of them are brilliant minds, but we intentionally wanted to come in with a fresh idea, whether it works or not. I think that's the kind of the goal of a startup. You're there to challenge almost the status quo and try to do something differently. And if it fails, then at least it kind of like failed pretty quickly, and it's not like a massive scale disaster. And I think it was breaking out of this legacy thinking that was a challenge for us because, like you said, you speak with a government entity and it's like, no, we're kind of like, no, we're not going to adopt AI, we're not going to go to the cloud, we're not going to do this. Or you speak even with some of the data providers at the very beginning, no, but that's our sales process, this is how it works. Like, why would you do that, or how would you do that? And I think it's kind of like these early discussions that we had. I mean, with a lot of them, it obviously, once they understand the whole picture and what we're trying to do, they ease to the whole idea. But I think this is probably the biggest challenge we also faced as a startup early on.
And was it hard to get your first customers on the, let's say, on the user side? Because yeah, the conversations with the companies can be tough, but I can imagine it being easier to sort of to agree on something because you're offering them an extra option of an extra way of selling their data, right? So that can be sort of easy. But how about getting the other customers? Was it easy? Was it?
I think it would have been significantly harder like 3 years ago. Luckily for us, there's a whole kind of all the awareness campaigns, everything the European Space Agency is pushing out there about the importance of using such data. It's kind of like creating that or preparing the market more or less. For us, we were very, very lucky. Like almost three of the biggest prospects that we have right now, they came to us as organic inbound. So it was less work on our side to convince them. So that was kind of the lucky thing in what we were doing. Um, but again, it wasn't, and we don't think it will be very difficult because we've aggregated quite a lot of information from the users that we interviewed at the very beginning. So we know that our product solves a problem that they face on a daily basis, and it makes their life easier. So then once you have that, it's easier to kind of like package that and explain it to the buyer persona in our organization. And hey, you're able to save X amount of time, or you'll be able to unlock that and that much potential if you use LYRASENSE. So I think maybe a few years ago it would have been very difficult. Now it's significantly easier, but it's never so easy that it's just like, one call and you close the deal. I wish, but it's just yeah, it's at least people are willing to listen. I think in a few years ago, if you would go up to I don't know, a trading company or so on, maybe they wouldn't even want to, like, they don't see the connection between space and what they're doing, or so on. But now that's kind of changing.
I can imagine that right after since the invasion of Ukraine, the Earth observation market has, or the value of Earth observation data has skyrocketed 100%.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the obvious use cases for geospatial intelligence is obviously national security, defense applications. So there's also that kind of connection. And right now in Europe, there's a big push towards that. But also a few years ago, everything around environmental reporting and everything around that, also new regulations coming up and new regulations that were just enforced recently. They're they're very big. How do I say it? Kind of like driving this whole geospatial adoption within industry, and that's relatively recent. All of it.
It's not just national defense, as you said. There's a lot of Earth observation applications that we could go into, but before that, you mentioned ESA. I know you've been accepted into the ESA Incubation Center and some more that we will talk. But how has been the interactions with ESA?
Quite honestly, so it's a very big organization. So figuring out how to navigate that and where your contact point is quite challenging. But I think joining this like business incubator is a very, very good start, because you're not on your own trying to navigate who to speak with in such a massive entity. But you kind of like just have that very clear, hey, this is what we need. That's our need right now. Who do we speak with? And then once you kind of figure that out, everyone is very welcoming. Like we had very interesting discussions with different people at the European Space Agency, from different departments, and everyone is excited to support and help. So I think that's not an issue. It's figuring out who would be the person to speak with is the biggest challenge, especially if you're like a no-name startup still at the very early days.
Also, it kind of acts as a validation that conversations with such a large entity go well, and there's ongoing interest across the agency. But also, you've been accepted into Seraphim Space Camp, which is the best, if not one of the best, space accelerators in Europe. How did that go, and what do you think? What do you think they saw in LYRASENSE that made them want to uh, invest in you?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and it's quite a story, because I obviously knew of Seraphim since my masters, and it's something that I've been following posts and so on for a while. Then there was that opportunity to apply to Mission 15, and we did apply, submitted our application. Things were straightforward. Like, it's not a very difficult, like, the requirements to submit an application were pretty straightforward. But then I think it was, I don't recall the exact date, but it was a very tough day, to be honest, at work. I remember my co-founder and I were just like sitting down, like, wow, it's been very tough today. And for some reason, I decided to check my spam folder, and then I see, hey, congratulations, you made it to the next phase. And somehow my like that their email was flagged as spam, which is, I was very very lucky to see. Then it was basically a series of interviews and discussions. They were pretty tough, to be quite honest. And it's not just about like the whole tech and what you're doing that is novel or so on. It's about how you're going to translate that into a successful business, and how are you planning to execute, and what is your hiring strategy. Quite a lot of operational questions as well. Why they chose us, I mean, I don't know if they had other reasons, but I do know that we're quite aligned with their, also what they see the market evolve, how the market is evolving, and the importance of not just AI and agentic AI, but the whole software component of the downstream, and how that is going to drive value for obviously commercial and civilian applications, but also defense and security, national security applications. So I think we were quite aligned in that. Obviously, being part of the ESA business incubator, like you mentioned, gives a lot of credibility. A lot of the things have been already validated technically with them and through our partner, the German Aerospace Center. So it kind of also has that layer of
Mhm.
validation. And the accelerator itself was very intense experience. I think the biggest value we got is the network. So I mean, you're in the space sector, everything is quite connected. It's like a
Yes.
little small world within our world. And I think Seraphim has a very good reputation and very strong network. So like, I mean, it's amazing how easy it is to just ask them, hey, can you help us set up a meeting with that person? And then done, it's there. And I think that's like one of the biggest values.
And has your experience across these accelerators, the East Incubation Center, and some others that you've gone through, changed your perspective of the European funding landscape? Because there's this topic about, like, yeah, Europe, it's very difficult to raise funds. We can't compete with the US, and so on and so forth. Yep. Has that changed your views?
It's still it's very different. I think the bar, like the threshold or the bar, is significantly higher here than compared to the US. Or the things that are expected of you to be able to raise are just a bit more. Like, often, at least we hear the stories. In the US, you have a great idea, you meet someone, he likes you, like, how much do you need? It's done deal. Here is like, yeah, what is your revenue, etc. For the space sector, I think there is a lot more willingness to invest in the sector now than in the previous years. I understand that it's a much longer process with investors, especially if you're speaking with generalist investors. So there's obviously this curiosity, this wow, we want to invest in a space tech startup, but then what are the risks involved? We don't understand the market dynamics. So there's quite a big, lengthy process of educating them. Having the European Space Agency and Seraphim in our support and supporting us kind of gives you a bit more credibility. You also can just kind of have um, like if an investor is a bit unsure of something to do with the market dynamics or the technology, you can easily help them kind of de-risk that by setting up a meeting with someone from either side. But I think overall, there's a the trend is more positive to invest in space tech in Europe. It's still very far from the US though. It's still much easier there.
And does this mean that you would consider, as many other companies do, to open, let's say, LYRASENSE US?
Um, I mean, look, the US still is the biggest market. But our focus right now is being in Europe, or at least Europe and the UK. Europe, also for the national security defense applications, there's quite a lot of need to build European sovereign solutions, and that's something that we're really doubling down on, and we believe in generating impact here before expanding. But possibly I mean, it's a global product from day one. Users can be from anywhere. As a matter of fact, a lot of our early customers are not from Europe. So I think scaling it is not going to be like a matter of which markets to enter or so on. It's going to be a straightforward process.
You mentioned here a point I had forgotten about: defense. How has been your experience? Yeah, we've talked about this, the war in Ukraine. There's wars going on everywhere. Unfortunately, there's a growing demand for, I would say, national security solutions, military intelligence at a European level and at like an individual countries as well. How are you having those conversations? Because those are, like, I would say, slightly different and more, I don't know, yeah, complicated than directly speaking with a space company about Earth observation data for, let's say, agricultural crop measurement or things like this. How is that conversation? How do you plan those conversations, and is it easy dealing with national security side of things?
It's a very fair question. I think it's differs between one company to another, also based on the background of the founders, etc. For us, the way we're approaching it is kind of very almost in a very not I wouldn't say cautious, but we're it's a much longer process, as you mentioned. Procurement cycles are significantly longer, requirements are very different, and we're just kind of still building these relationships in that sector for us. So we're using the civilian commercial applications as technology proof points as we kind of build up more towards maybe national security and defense applications. Um, Generally, discussions, I think now there's quite an interest. Every country has a quite of a big mandate in kind of bringing technology and innovation within their defense and national security departments. So there's this kind of willingness to listen to new ideas, and there's quite a lot that you can leverage in the defense sector. But right now, still challenging to just kind of being a no-name startup, quickly tapping into it. There you would require to kind of build these partnerships with primes, figure out how to navigate the whole scene and the whole network, and that's the stage we're at right now.
Okay, that's, yeah, I can imagine that's complicated or time consuming to say the least. But now, one more thing about the market. What exciting trends, or how do you see the future of the Earth observation industry or Earth observation market now that you are well established in the industry, and you're building your solution in this market? How do you see the future of the industry, say over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years?
I think we'll finally break that silo of adoption within industry. I think now it's really possible. The things that are being developed and announced every week is insane. Like last week, everything Clay is working on, and then just earlier this week, the announcement from Google, and everything they're developing, and you see that kind of like momentum in the market picking up. So it's super exciting times. Also, a lot of competition coming up, which is obviously very good for our customers to have different options. But it also kind of keeps everything more engaging and interesting. So I definitely see that there will be a much wider adoption within the non-space sector and industry in general, using satellite data, geospatial intelligence, etc. Yeah, it's a very exciting time. At I mean, the market as a kind of a general step back, I know there's been a lot of question marks and what is Earth observation? What is remote sensing? How is that different from geospatial? There's quite a lot of questions around that, but we're seeing more people accepting or kind of like open to even mix different things together in terms of terminology and kind of like openness to try out different applications and different use cases, etc. So I think every like that's on the downstream side, and then on kind of like the satellite operators, I think there's a lot of exciting things being developed as well. From edge compute to data centers in space to kind of like figuring out which images to take and which not, and what to process on board a satellite before kind of
Yeah.
sending that down. Everything happening on the whole direct to device scene as well. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if at some point you'll be able to just kind of like deploy an application, run it on board a satellite, and just get the answer on your phone in a second. Without even knowing that it was based on satellite imagery, just like we use maybe GPS today to navigate around. And I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if very soon things are kind of moving in that direction.
The future is very bright. As you were saying, all the different ideas is it's a very good time to be active in the space industry and to be a user of
Definitely.
just everything, because eventually that'll come down to everyday users. So now you mentioned some minutes ago that you were lucky. I guess I imagine you've been lucky because you were on the right place at the right time. But you've also, I imagine, well, worked a lot to be on that place at that time. So what's been your experience founding the company and taking it from when you met your founder and had the idea for LYRASENSE to where it is today? What's been your biggest learning, and what's been your biggest lesson in terms of things that you would have done perhaps now looking back differently?
Mhm. I mean, I'd say trusting more in our instincts and gut feeling. Um, at the beginning, also being slightly outsider, having this kind of new perspective. We touched upon it earlier. There is all this advice of no, just stick to the way things have been done. Um, don't kind of think outside the box. That's a validated way. Just follow that path. And a lot of times we kind of like swayed away from our direction of what we want to build because of such discussions. But I think just looking back, what I would do differently is definitely just stick to what we feel is right in our instincts, and just kind of build around that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that's sort of like a learning experience and something that you would have changed. And also now about scaling the team or hiring, what would be like, what is the thing or the skill that you would look for in someone that wants to join LyraSense?
Definitely curiosity. We we don't necessarily want to just hire from the space sector. We're super open to that as long as that person is willing to try and learn things pretty quickly. So I think curiosity is probably one of the biggest things. And then on an internal team level, we definitely appreciate transparency. Like, we do things like we'd rather have someone to try something and fail, lose a customer, than just kind of like come up with a theory and spend so much time with developing a hypothesis around it. It's just like this kind of do things, learn quickly, fail quickly, and we take that to the extreme. And we're very open in discussing that, uh, every like sometimes almost on a daily basis. Like, hey, I messed up here. This is what I did wrong. How can we improve on that? And that's something that we definitely try to instill in everyone that joins the team.
Indeed, and that sense of ownership, it's often not taught, let's say, in universities, because yeah, that those are the soft skills that are even more important than technical skills, that they are hard to learn for many, because if you don't have the right experience, and you don't realize that you lack that skill, that's very tough to develop, indeed.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And now, looking into the future,
Hmm.
how do you see LyraSense over the next 2 to 3 years, on the short term, before 2030? And what's the future for LyraSense after 2030? Because I know that the market value is expected of the Earth observation. I think the Earth observation market value is expected to go beyond 250 billion by 2030, 2032. So how do you see, what's LyraSense going to do before or until 2030 and after 2030?
Yeah, I mean, it's a game of execution in the very short term. So our plan is to really expand within different verticals, different industries, land more customers. So beyond just kind of like the initial focus group, kind of looking at the longer term, what we see Lyra Sense is kind of like almost this interface between humanity and like planetary scale solutions. Like we want it to be the go-to software platform for anyone who wants to reason and act on Earth data in a very intuitive way, and it means expanding beyond just satellite data as well. So the ability to ingest and integrate, diffuse together or fuse together, sorry, whether it's IoT sensor data, open source intelligence, you name it. So it's kind of like moving into that kind of direction in the longer term.
So that be like not creating just a feature or a platform, but like a new ecosystem, right? Of analyzing data, space data at first, but let's say geospatial intelligence related data in general.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's definitely the direction.
That's that's a big market, a big ocean right there, but very complicated. So I can imagine there's a lot, a lot to be
Yeah,
done.
yes, of course, of course.
And now, what advice would you give to, let's say, young professionals, you 10 years ago, that see the industry? As you've said, there's so many applications, such a growing interest in the space industry. What would you recommend, or what advice would you give to someone thinking about starting his own startup?
I think persistence, like not giving up early, like the first few months are probably going to be the toughest. And there's quite a lot of criticism, a lot of people that don't know the industry or know the industry, but have their own reasons of kind of tearing your idea down. And I think persistence is pretty important. And the second tip would be speak to your users early on. I think we touched upon that, but openly, with a very open mind, challenge everything you're thinking with your users, and really focus on building something that they would love to use. And if you build an awesome product, I think you don't have to worry about marketing it or how to sell it, because kind of the users are driving that for you.
And we've got many examples of that happening, like especially in the AI world. There's so many tools that need no marketing now that so many people use them. That's true. That's very good advice, I have to say. And now, to close up, Nadir, any additional things you would want to say about LyraSense and your story? And if not, where can listeners learn more about you and about LyraSense?
Yeah, I mean, we have some exciting news that we'll be announcing soon. So yeah, stay tuned. And I think the best way to do so is to sign up to our newsletter. I know the website will be reworked, so it's one of the first iterations. It doesn't have all the information there, but sign up to our wait list, our newsletter, and I think that's the best way to stay informed.
Okay, it's been a pleasure having you here. It's been a great conversation, and we will talk in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And the pleasure was truly mine.
Thanks, Nader.
Thank you.